I now call the Des Moines City Council meeting for February 2nd to order, and with that, I'll have Councilmember Pennington lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let the record reflect that all 7 council members are present. Council, I'm going to move things a little bit out of order today. I'm going to address the censure of Councilmember Harris first. Before we get on with the process of our normal business, we need to address an issue concerning the conduct of Councilmember Harris. Some will say this might be a waste of time, and I couldn't agree more. However, council members are not subject to the same process as, say, an employee would go through, and when misconduct occurs, it is the responsibility of the council to address these actions. Our choice in a matter such as this is to look the other way or sweep it under the rug and condone it or address it. The council has the authority to pass resolutions as stated in Rule 24 of the council rules. A resolution is a formal statement of policy concerning matters of special or temporary character. A censure is a long-held power utilized by elected government bodies and allows the body to not only self-govern but also speak for itself by addressing and denouncing conduct of members that it deems inappropriate. A censure provides a public record disapproving of an official's actions and is an expression of disapproval by the body of one's elected peers. A censure does not impede a council member's ability to act as an elected official. Rather, censure acts as an attempted check on a council member's conduct to curtail future unprofessional acts or misconduct. With that, if anyone has come today to speak on this particular issue, I will open it up to public comment. Is there anyone here? Okay, Mr. Rick Johnson, you can take the podium. You have 3 minutes.
I'm Rick Johnson, live in Redondo Beach. Ever since Mr. Harris was voted to the council, he's been mistreated, ridiculed, kept from knowing what other council members were given. Even Gene was been kept from other committees and stuff. Only assigned one committee where others had multiple committees. Now the council wants to censor him from the council. Mr. Harris does a lot for the city, more than all combined. Just because he's not on the good old boys club, he votes for the good of the city. I blame this on the council member, or the city manager and the mayor. Of the years I've attended, not one of the 5Q club has voted anything the city manager wanted. Hard to believe it always turns out that way. Last week's meeting had been voted, counted for the hotel. It would have passed 5-2 that night. Before most of the citizens would have been out in the dark. Who comes up with these ideas? You, the council, work for the citizens of this city. Don't forget that. More transparency is needed in all projects that the city comes up with. Do your job. Remember, you work for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Do I have a motion? Yeah, just you'd have to say.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Okay.
I move to adopt draft ordinance number 23-006 to formally censure Councilmember J.C. Harris.
Second? Do I have a second? Second. Second by Councilmember Nutting. All right. I'm going to open up the floor to conversation. Who would like to go first? Deputy Mayor Buxton.
So tonight is a response, is in response to a situation that warranted an investigation. The investigation reflects the only formal written complaint from staff that has been lodged against Councilmember Harris. But this is not the only complaint that could have been lodged. One of my greatest concerns is Councilmember Harris's response to this process. Admitting his behavior, he cites it as unremarkable and later writes of the process as BS, though he wrote the whole word. Councilmember Harris gave a passionate delivery about the folly of responding to feelings during his comments on January 12th. He made these comments in denigration of the council, the neighborhood of Redondo, and also the victim who was present. Councilmember Harris has been consistently unapologetic for inappropriate, misleading, and/or offending comments in front of, to, or about staff, both written and in person, and including profanity and sexual innuendo. His public criticism has included almost every department in the city. He writes that to be offended at this would be as immature as saying, I'm just going to quote, okay, as, do these jeans make my ass look big? He has inferred that the finance director could benefit from a read of Finance for Dummies. He has referred to legally protected executive sessions as lairs, where titillating subjects such as abstinence and safe sex are discussed, without revealing who introduced the words or subjects. The administration, the public, and council can ask, correct, advise, discuss, and implore. This has all been done for 3 years. The only other legal option offered to us is a boundary in the form of censure. This censure, if passed, simply removes Councilmember Harris from 3 committee appointments for the rest of 2023. It is one city appointment, but he does have a 1 regional appointment and is an alternate for another regional appointment. He will not lose his responsibility or voice as a council member at this dais, and he will continue to hold his right to free speech, both in writing and in person. It has been asked, how does this censure specifically connect with the offense of being inappropriate with staff? I want to answer that in a second turn around. Thank you, Mayor.
I'll go next. For those of you that aren't familiar with the packet, an incident occurred on the last meeting of December. Mr. Council, and this is my view of what happened. Mr. Harris seemed to wait until the room was clear. A particular female of the city staff was isolated, cornered, swore at, intimidated, with arms flashing and so forth, which was extremely troublesome to all of us. What Deputy Mayor Buxton was alluding to is we've, over the last 3 years, seen what's very concerning, an escalation in this type of behavior. On multiple occasions, we have a standard rule here. We always work through the city manager to contact staff. Mr. Harris refuses to do that. He's always going right to people. They've turned him back over. They've faced beratement for that. As she said, in many cases, some of our staff have been berated on his blog and so forth. It's been improper. I was reviewing his past, and I wanted to read you his first email. This is the type of person that does this, and he doesn't seem to think it's wrong. He'd been given a new computer, and he got the packet, and his reply was, test reply, I solemnly swear to use this for city business, totally official, no porn, not me, Buster, all biz, you betcha. Now, he thought that was funny, I'm sure, but it was inappropriate. And we've seen it time and time again. It's problematic, and as far as one of the reasons why he's only on one committee is because he was on 2 last year, or the last term of before former mayor. In the process, he was on the transportation committee. He does things like contact WashDOT and give him direction. That's not his job. Part of you guys have been here many times where we've chastised him for doing things beyond the scope of our authority. And it's been a problem. When we've called him out on it, nothing's been done. We've had several incidences that have been reported to the city manager that I'm aware of that have been problematic with situations like this. The problem is we can't do the warning process anymore. This is why we need to take it to the next step because of this escalation. We've seen this happening and it's growing. So this is why we're at this point. So I want you to understand that. Who's next? Councilmember Nutty.
My comments are, and I wrote them down so I didn't get anything wrong here. So this is a difficult and such sensitive situation. Typically, employees would be dealing with this on a more private level. But with an elected official involved, this becomes a public matter. That being said, we as elected officials are and should be held to the same standard of any employee, if not a higher standard. We are elected to represent you, our citizens, and with that comes a higher level of discretion and responsibility. The acts described are unbecoming of an elected official, and had it been an employee in a corporate setting, he would have been fired from his position, or at the very least been made to take mandatory sensitivity training. As an elected official, the same HR rules that apply in corporate settings do not apply as such. So we are taking the only recourse we can. Thank you.
Councilmember Steinmetz.
There are a couple points that I want to make here, and that nobody wanted this to happen. Nobody thinks this is something worth celebrating. Something, yes, JC. Nobody wanted to come to this. I know that he has been advised privately on several occasions. He continues doing those actions. I have had several interactions myself with him. One that were just inappropriate, that really were bothersome. At one point, I replied to an email he sent me. He said, I'd like you to read this aloud and just tell me what you think of it. And he didn't see anything wrong with it and said he's always aware of exactly how he's being perceived by other people. Well, then he gets on his blog and he tells us that he's not a professional politician, although he hasn't done anything else for the past few years, but he has a problem with tone, and he recognizes that, but he's taken no action to change it. In this case, it's bullying. It's cornering a female member of the staff with his arms flying out, growling, near shouting, and using profanity. That is unacceptable behavior. It very simply is. And I don't know that there's any other way to get through to him. I've had several conversations that have gone back and forth to no avail. I've been told by other members of the council that they have talked to him as well. And nothing happens. Nothing changes. So I think that, for an elected official, you need to watch your tone. You need to understand how you're interacting with people, and if you refuse to change after being advised, then you're going to get publicly censored for doing it. And that's why we're here, and it's sad that it had to come to this. Nobody wants to be here doing this, but this is the only option that the council has left, and it's truly unfortunate.
Councilmember Oxiger.
Being new to the council, I've heard things about disagreements various colleagues have had with Councilmember Harris, but it's all subjective. There's no data, there's no evidence. I'm told by the mayor that he cites 10 to 15, which is a pretty broad number, 10 to 15 range of incidents that this has taken place, and it's involved staff members. Well, I would assume that that would have gone through HR as this last one did. But I've gotten no records. I've gotten no data. You know, if I'm here and I'm supposed to make a decision on this, I need to have some supporting documentation. I can't just, you know, the incident that's talked about, or the incidents that apparently, you know, promoted all of this is a swear word was used. It's not appropriate to use it in, you know, the course of what we do here. There is a disagreement with the investigators as to whether or not any threatening actions took place on view of the video. This is a pretty significant action that's being proposed here. And I'll say this on any decision that I make here from the dais. I need data to support it. And so as far as right now, what I'm looking at, the one thing that is inconclusive is the fact is that a swear word was used. And I would admonish the council member for using that. But the rest, you know, there's a lot of anecdotal information here. I need the data.
Councilmember Pennington.
Thank you, Mayor. This is not a good day for our city. You know, this is not something that we should have to discuss, but we're here, and we have to have this discussion. You know, I've been privileged to work in public service and be a public servant for 47 years. And in public service, right or wrong, you're held to a higher standard. Whether you're a firefighter, a police officer, you work for the city, or if you're an elected official. And with that comes a level of expectation, and there's a level of public trust that's given to you by virtue of what you do. And as an elected, by virtue of being elected, you're given a certain level of trust. And I would say to the city staff, because I've been in your shoes for a number of years, elected officials, a lot of them at best are difficult to work with. They are. And for whatever reason, not all, but some feel that they've been elected, they're overnight, they're experts on everything. Overnight, they have a monarchy. Overnight, they're entitled. And that's not true, you know, that it just isn't. But that seems to be the mentality with some, not all. And so as a staff, you got to learn how to work with that. You got to sometimes get some thick skin. But you never have to be berated. You never have to be in fear of your safety. You never, ever have to feel unsafe in your workforce and your workplace, ever, by anybody. Elected officials, unless they've done something that is illegal, really don't have any checks and balances. I mean, you can look at it, whether you want to look locally or at a national level, unless it's something that's criminal, there aren't any checks and balances. This is the only way to do that. So what I'm going to do tonight, and as my colleague had mentioned a few weeks ago, he doesn't get concerned about the blood and all the emotion and all of that. He deals with data. So I've looked at the data in this report, the information that was given to me as well as the rest of the council. And based on that data, I'm going to have to support the motion for censure. Just this data, not the other innuendos or things that have gone on. That's it.
Councilmember Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a statement, and since basically, you know, you guys all get 2 whacks at this and then probably other stuff, I hope you will bear with me. But to the members of the audience, I would ask you when you leave tonight to look around at the foyer at how well lit it is, and I would ask you to read the last page of the investigator's report where it says that the employee told me that if I watched the video, I would see Harris looking animated and gesticulating with his hands. However, to an objective observer, that is not readily apparent. You have heard at least a dozen fibs. There's no other word for it, okay? And if I seem less than contrite, basically, yeah. And here is my statement. Many years ago, my dear wife was driving through the University of Washington with 2 very young, unhappy children and cut off a man in a very large truck. He expressed his unhappiness through the window, and let's just say he did not think she was being as contrite as he thought appropriate. So he followed her home, crossed the bridge, down I-5 into Burien, all the way to our house, and pulled up behind her in the dark. He got out and knocked on the window, apparently wanting to continue to make her aware of the severity of her offense in almost damaging his very nice new truck. I came out of the house, and I had a different reaction. I see my terrified wife in a small car, 2 screaming black children in the back with a strange, large white guy in a large dual-axle truck. And I had exactly 0 empathy for that person about whatever. When you overreact so spectacularly to anything, you have crossed a line. The first time the event under discussion was explained to me was on a Zoom call with the investigator. I had no idea what this was all about. I expressed empathy and concern for the employee in question. Afterwards, I read the Des Moines Personnel Manual, which I would ask everyone to actually take a look at, and there are several options for dealing with all kinds of harassment. That's when about 90% of my empathy went out the window. When I realized that someone at City Hall had picked up the phone and made a choice. They could have called me, but instead phoned 2 attorneys. And the remaining 10% of my empathy evaporated during executive session last month when no one asked a very basic academic question, which I would. Is the investigator's report accurate? I tell you it is not. Given the chronic lack of transparency I hear about from the public literally every week, the question I had hoped that would come up was not, do you believe the employee? Of course I would. But the question really is about the report. I do not believe the report. It is not accurate because I was there. I requested the video. Oh, by the way, it's off not by a little, by a lot. I requested the video, and regardless of the emotions in play, one should always question secondhand reportage. As a reporter, you should be expected to provide some evidence that you at least got some of the quotes correct. I would love to have that recording. I would love to have the videotape of the foyer. I would love to have any primary sources that are mentioned here. They exist. I've asked for them and received none. And if they were available, they should be in the packet, because that's what you should make your decisions on. Beyond that, this entire show is such a spectacular overreaction that it cannot be tolerated. It isn't like the incident with the guy in the truck. It's far worse, because at least that guy had the excuse of operating on adrenaline and, you know, maybe some other stuff. But this is government. This is something that could have been de-escalated at any point over 2 months. That was the whole point I endured the mugging of the executive session. And after 3 years of this similar rubbish, I expected this night would come, or rather something like it. And not because of anything I've done or would ever do, but rather because of what I represent. Some people will do almost anything to prevent positive change, and that should freak you out. It brings to the surface something so ugly but normative in our town that we stopped even noticing it. We simply try to navigate it as best we can, and it is exactly the reason I ran for office. Thank you.
Next round, Deputy Mayor Buxton.
Thank you, Mayor. So, as has already been discussed a bit, is the outcome of this censure is a committee probation. And the question is how is this connected to the consequence of committee, the crime, so, or not the crime, I won't use that word, just the offense matching. It's connected because committees are composed primarily of some council members, but staff. So HR cannot regulate the exposure of staff to a council member and committee. Based on Councilmember Harris's response to this event, I think that is key. His response to this event and his general behavior, as well as his posture toward elected colleagues, it makes his service on regional committees a little bit of a concern. Here's why, beginning with myself. One of Councilmember Harris's first interactions with me from the dais included a dismissive response. When politely asked if he would follow protocol for the meeting, he just rebuffed me with tough noogies. I once took a phone call under the agreement that the content would not appear in his blog the next day. Then it did. And I was also misrepresented. It took a series of interactions in order to get him to amend his narrative, with the justification being, quote, "You're an elected official, for crying out loud." Nothing he has ever written about me has been the full truth. He has dismissed and refused corrections or apologies regarding not only myself, but my colleagues, regional policy, and regional organizations. And I have refused to fight with him or humiliate him in public. In another instance, he was walking on the opposite side of the road as I drove past, both of us heading to the same meeting. When I rolled down the window and informed him of a change of meeting rooms, he responded shouting a string of F expletives, and this was on a public street. About a year and a half ago, South King Housing and Homelessness Executive Board, made up of mayors, electeds, and staff from 11 cities in King County, felt it was prudent to create a new participant agreement for all of us to sign in response to an uncomfortable interaction in a meeting with an elected, not Councilmember Harris. This is something else. The point here is they all felt it was appropriate to respond to feelings and offense in the meeting. With regard to regional representation, it's important to maintain a good and respectful relationships regardless of our policy agreement. After I reported working tirelessly on the Growth Management Policy Board of PSRC, it was on their Vision 2050 project, Councilmember Harris publicly responded, "Be afraid, be very afraid." I just don't consider that a very prudent, response to me as his colleague, but a response to the agency that oversees all federal transportation dollars into our 4-county region. So if all electeds are open game for betrayal, simply because they're electeds. You're an elected, for heaven's sakes. If staff can be subject to public humiliation because they shouldn't care that what their ass looks like, and if Councilmember Harris is free to shout expletives in public or in front of staff when he's frustrated, I'm concerned about the propriety of his representation in the region, especially when subject matter can be reported in a written forum that's not protected by the OPMA and is not subject to fact-checking. So, in closing, there is a substantive precedence for our action tonight, supported by the highly regarded Municipal Research and Service Center. On their site, they mention a list of reasons for censure, and here are just a few of them. Failing to offer courtesy and respect, using insulting or foul language in discussion, violating the confidentiality of executive session, failing to observe ethics guidelines and/or taking actions outside the meeting that are aimed at undermining the board decision. Those things are all considered supportable for censure. Based on all of the above, I feel comfortable with my decision tonight. Thank you.
Councilmember Steinmetz.
Yeah, I'd like to make 2 quick points. One is that Councilmember Harris thinks that there was opportunities to de-escalate, and he's absolutely right. He's had at least 4 opportunities now to de-escalate this, and he has chosen not to do that. And these are just the steps that I know about because they're what's in our packet. There was an interview that was done by the attorney that investigated this. He chose not to de-escalate. There was an HR report done where I believe he was also interviewed, or at least given a copy of, and he chose not to de-escalate that. In executive session a couple of weeks ago, he was presented with everything, and he chose not to de-escalate. He chose to deny. And then tonight, he chooses to blame, say he has 0 empathy for the person that he made feel scared. All these opportunities to de-escalate, and he has chosen not to take any of them. Is there any other question why we have gotten up to this point at this time? Because it's the actions that he did that started this whole mess. The second thing is that I'd like to ask a question of the city manager. And from an HR perspective, if Mr. Harris had been a city employee who was accused of cornering a subordinate female, and even just and responding in the way that is documented here in the report, giving any benefit of the doubt to Mr. Harris, but we all agreed that he used absolutely foul language, what would be the city's response to that employee?
Councilmember, I agree with Councilmember Pennington. It's unfortunate we're here. So what governs city employees is distinct from what governs elected officials. So understanding that, we do not have it within our realm to do anything with Councilmember Harris. But my concern and my role and that of our HR department, of our city, is to, the first thing, protect employees. We did that during COVID, and we've spent the last 7 years trying to establish a culture with the goals of courtesy, respect, cooperation, inclusion, and we have 0 tolerance for this type of behavior. There have been many, many examples of Councilmember Harris doing things the way he thinks they should be done, regardless of whatever rules exist. If he was an employee, long ago, there probably would have been put in place something called a performance improvement plan, where he would have been called out for the behavior, and there would have been some remedial actions available to that person to change their ways. We don't have the power to do that. Let me repeat. Nonetheless, in my view, the days of providing misinformation, bullying, intimidation based on power, and this was exactly what that was, since he was confronting an employee who works with the council and tries to be as accommodating as possible. We avoid hostile work environments, and the days of males abusing females in this workplace are over long ago in this country and in Des Moines. So the answer to your question is that if it were an employee that did that, all things being equal for all the behavior exhibited over time, we have zero tolerance for that. And that employee would no longer be at this city based on that.
City Manager, I got a couple questions too. A couple of the things that were talked about were you had to implement processes since this action has occurred to protect your employees. And to Mr. Oxiger's point, could you elaborate on, with protecting the identities, maybe some of the other incidences of what you felt was improper contact?
So the laws of the state of Washington are very explicit in stating that in a council manager form of government, the council is responsible for policy and passing budgets and attending to municipal events. The mayor can, or designee can go to those events, represent the city, ceremonial type things. But the administration of the government is in the hands of the city manager. And one of the things that the RCWs, the state laws, are explicit that contact with staff comes through the city manager. And that is something that we've always asked our electeds to observe. And for the most part, all of our electeds have done that. And I appreciate it because it has to do with knowing what information is going out, making sure that they're not being asked to do something that would disrupt their normal work plans, what's involved in the research and all of that. Councilmember Harris has sent us somewhere in the neighborhood of over 3,000 emails requesting information. Okay, that's relatively intolerable. I think that if we responded, that's all we would do. We could change the name of the city to whatever. There were early on examples of very disrespectful emails sent by Mr. Harris to different members of our staff, which continue. And I just want to make the point that we have a great staff. We have an incredible staff. And I think that that's acknowledged not only by our council, but by our region, by other cities. They know our staff is amazing. And they want to support the work of the council. There's no question about that. But it needs to be done in the context of what we need to do as a city every single day. And Mr. Harris has violated that beyond belief. I think that one of in this censure being its own item, I can't understand why Mr. Harris has not yet apologized to the employee to whom his anger was directed. I don't have a problem if anybody gets angry or they get frustrated, but I have a problem when they try to target a specific individual, creating a hostile work environment. Not acceptable on any level. Sorry, that's the data. I want to also mention that not long ago, Mr. Harris started shouting in a room that was heard by people outside of that room and exhibited what was concerning enough for us that we established a protocol that when there's a public meeting and Mr. Harris is in attendance, we're going to ask an armed officer to be there as well. Because we see an escalation in behavior, the incident with our employee, which I find abhorrent. And I can't imagine where in your heart you can't be concerned about the well-being of that employee. And I have no idea how a car confrontation equates to what happened here. What happened here was that a person that claims special status because he's a council member intimidated a member of our staff simply on that basis. And there was agreement between both parties that that is exactly what occurred. Okay, Mr. Harris's comment was that it was unremarkable. In other words, he can't even remember doing it. Our employee was scared by that. That's not okay. That's the bottom line. And there have been examples leading toward that, and I'm incredibly disappointed this happened. I can't control it. The only person that can control it is Mr. Harris for his behavior. Hopefully that answers your question, Mayor.
Thank you, City Manager. I also would add that I don't think Mr. Harris understands the ramifications of his actions. I've seen it over the last 3 years. As I said before, he's been called out time and time again, and for various things, and he dismisses it. He just doesn't care, doesn't seem to think it's important. I don't know what it is, but I just think there's something in him that doesn't understand the that what he did and the impact it was wrong. And Councilmember Oxiger, I just have to your point about needing data, just so you know, in October you had a similar incident in the parking lot where you cornered an employee. You were chastised in an email by the city manager, and that's kind of the beginning of a process. This is the culmination of many more, right? So my point is that in his case, I just don't believe talking to him or having him make an apology or anything is going to work, because it hasn't. It just flat out hasn't. And so we've come to this point, and it's a sad day. It really is. Councilmember Oxiger.
First of all, I don't understand how I've suddenly gotten into this whole thing. But the incident you're referring to is I simply asked the finance director where I would find something in the budget. Now, the rest of the conversation that went on, and as I told the rest of the council, I didn't recognize all the rest of it, that I had been rude, that I had been disrespectful, or anything else. I did not recognize any of that as actually having taken place. I was never asked by the city manager prior to him, saying, yes, you had done all of these things. I was never given the opportunity, afforded the opportunity to present my side of the case. So with regard to that, I'm offended that you brought this up. It's, and this whole thing is taking on, I agree with Councilmember Pennington. The item that we have here is what happened in this particular instance. I've asked for it. Where's the data? Where's the evidence on all of this other stuff? It's anecdotal. No staff member should be put in the position that this entailed. But are we just piling on here?
Councilmember Harris.
Thank you. I have a second statement. I was told that I've become somewhat, I don't seem as sympathetic as people. I'm having eye surgery in a couple of months, and I'm going to see if they can tag on something to do about my permanent eye roll reflex. You try going to these meetings since 2008 and see what it does to you. See, it's a funny thing. If you push back against something like this, which is not true, okay? I mean, the event is simply not true. You're insensitive. Just in this discussion, you've heard, oh man, I mean, I wish that guy who does the sports commentary, I wish I could just do a fact check. There are so many fibs that I don't know where to go. I would love to have any transparency on this. It just didn't happen. And it has been that way for 3 years, I mean, on everything. We received a copy of the March negotiating agreement on the hotel. Okay, that was in March. We received that last Monday after it was canceled. You know, I mean, that's the way the city handles everything, including this. No better and no worse. I mean, I understand why people do not apply the same skepticism to something like this as they would with the hotel. We have a tough time as human beings accepting that anyone, especially in our nice town, would be so shameless to take advantage of such a radioactive allegation for political gain. That really takes, you know. But if you watch the last meeting, you know, we're talking about at least $100 million just at the Marina. And with all that on the line and knowing how much people here want to appear to do the right thing, why wouldn't someone try to take advantage? Okay, it's so easy. So in the absence of any evidence, I would ask you to look at how I've conducted myself on the dais, how my colleagues conduct themselves, and how I respond to the chronic harassment, intimidation, and fibbing that no one should have to tolerate. I get letters expressing regret at all the bullying that I have to put up with, but another question people don't ask is, why is it tolerated? And I ran for office to change that because nobody else would. Electeds are not employees. And ironically, it was set up that way because in a properly functioning government, we're supposed to be above the administration, okay? So we have no HR rights. We're not entitled to the same basic dignity. It's just all up to an honor system. So as insensitive as it may sound tonight, and I'm sorry, but the wrong people are on trial here. That's what the facts of 3.5 plus years of video would tell you. And since I'm not an employee, I condemn anyone voting for this right back. Boy, does that sound childish, but particularly the sponsor. He has demonstrated a chronic lack of good judgment necessary to be mayor. And I'm going to frame a copy of this and display it as a badge of honor. And going back to sensitivity, unlike my colleagues, I've known all along exactly how the entire town feels about all kinds of things, like that hotel. I knocked on 6,000 doors when I ran for office. I know how people feel about things, and those people know how I conduct myself one-on-one. On the contrary, we owe the public an apology for a completely tone-deaf approach to the Marina and just everything else. We caused the public an unconscionable amount of unnecessary upset. And also, we created uncertainty for them, which I'm sure developers also really love. We change direction, then we patronize and scold the community for having the nerve to object, while at the same time thanking them for all the great public input. when people raise the issue of transparency, you know what they're really saying? That's just a polite thing that politicians say instead of, I'm not sure I trust you. We need to fix that, and the most sensitive thing I think I can do is to continue to maintain a consistent message and knock on doors and try to talk to people directly. But in spite of all this junk, it continues to be, swear to Christ, my honor to serve, not because of what we are tonight, but because I've lived here long enough to know what this place can be, and that's the only reason I do this. Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none, let's go ahead and take a vote on the motion to adopt the draft resolution number 23006 to formally censure J.C. Harris. All those in favor, raise your right hand. I see Councilmember Pennington, Councilmember Steinmetz, Deputy Mayor Buxton, Councilmember Nutting, and myself. All those opposed, I see Councilmember Harris and Councilmember Oxiger. The censure passes 5-2. Are there any correspondence?
There are no other correspondence outside the emails already received by council. They'll be in the packet tomorrow.
Okay. It's now time for the comments from the public. I would just like to remind those participants that any person making personal, impertinent, or slanderous remarks or become boisterous, threatening, or personally abusive while addressing the council will be removed from the meeting. You have 3 minutes to speak, and the first one on the list is Mr. Bill Linscott.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council Members, City Manager, and everybody else who's here. I'm speaking as a resident tonight, and I've a couple of thoughts on the study session. We certainly appreciate the time you devoted to allowing the public to comment. I think everybody had a chance that wanted to comment that night to comment. One of the drawbacks of that, though, is the council got shorted. We would have liked to have heard more discussion of the questions and inquiries there. And I think there are questions you've still got. I know there's questions from the public we were hoping to hear get passed around. So I hope in the future, not too far away, there's a second session of that study session. And this time, we'll listen to you. I think that's important. We need to hear what you all are thinking, the questions you have. Based on that, we'll answer some of our own. It looks like we're deferring the kind of the private investment part to that north end of the bulkhead there, or the Marina. And so we'll have some quiet time, but we certainly heard several council members say, we intend to put some commercial stuff down there. So it'll be back. I don't know when, but in this time when we're maybe not pursuing that as much, I would encourage you to get a process in place where you update yourselves on the public preferences. Last time we did that was on the Argosy boat years ago. And I get the feeling sometimes you think the public's against any kind of change down there. It's not. It's about right change and getting the right stuff there and its size to fit. And I think that would be a worthwhile thing to do as in parallel with bringing on the public features that you're going to pursue. Suggestion on the questions. The dock replacement folks had a process when they put out their plan. They said, send us your questions, and we'll respond to them, and we'll post them all. I think you ought to have some concept like that developed for this portion. They had them all on the website. Scott and Katie did a marvelous job trying to answer everything they could, let people know where they couldn't because they weren't ready yet. But eventually we had fewer questions, and it was few and far between, and it's helped a lot. That would work here as well. I think this process we have for public comment in this meeting is good for certain things. It's not good for this kind of dialogue because you can't discuss it. So we're looking for something that you all will have that allows that kind of engagement to work. And there are just a couple other things you want input on, like the comprehensive plan. You need to think about how we collect public inputs on that. We really want to engage. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Linscott. Miss Victoria Andrews.
Thank you. I'm Victoria Andrews, and I represent Marina Estates on the corner of 6th and 223rd, and its 36 unit owners comprising individuals, couples, and families. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight and for continuing to involve the community in the long-term planning for the use of our city's resources. I have been meeting with many others whose top priority is to preserve our shoreline for the generations that will follow us. At our last meeting, there was consensus that we all want two things: thoughtfully planned progress and the reinstallation of a Citizens Advisory Board, which has disappeared from the city's website as a volunteer opportunity. I don't know if you know that. By comparison, the city of Kent, where I worked for over 9 years, has 5 citizen commissions. We can do better. Before approving the proposal on Marina redevelopment, I'd like you to consider an amendment that defines the scope of the feasibility studies, specifically what projects will be studied, and the physical boundaries referred to by the word land side. The amendment should include a timeline and cost not to exceed a certain amount. Finally, the amendment should state a mechanism for public accountability that includes the establishment of a planning commission or special purpose committee that would meet monthly with staff and elected officials to keep the progress on track. We elect our council members to represent our voice, and clearly by the attendance last week, you could see that we want our voice to be heard and respected. It appeared that you valued and appreciated that. So if the city manager chooses not to establish a planning commission on the future of our marina, at the repeated request of the citizens that you serve, he's ignoring the will of the voters who elected you. How do you feel about that? He is the manager. You are the elected officials, the leaders. Thank you so much.
Miss Eldon Davis. Or Sir Eldon Davis, sorry. Yeah, Eldon, my apologies. In fact, one of the finest men I ever knew was named Eldon, so my apologies.
It's not Elton, it's Eldon.
Eldon, yeah. E-L-D-O-N, right?
Radio. Well, hello. Yes, my name is Eldon Davis. I spoke last time regarding what we thought was going to be the emphasis on the hotel and retail spaces. That didn't turn out quite that way. But this time, I will be speaking about what was talked about last time mostly, and that was a creek along or on 223rd, and then the steps going down to the marina. And I would say also that my words are going to be a little bit different than the copy I sent you guys, because I had some other words, but the content is the same. All right, creek along 223rd. I think most of us realize going down 223rd into the marina is only one of 2 spots where you can drive to the marina. That's all. 2 ways to get there. So question 1, where along 223rd will this creek that was proposed, where it begin and where will it end? What does that mean? Oh, then I should subtract some. Agree?
We'll give you leeway, sir. Go ahead, continue on. After I called you Mrs., I definitely got to give you some time. All right, go ahead.
All right, that's question 1. Number 2, what will happen to the creek once it gets near the end of 223rd? 3, how will the underground water east of the creek starting point get to that starting point? 4, how wide and deep will the creek be and the estimated velocity of the water? 5, will the creek have some form of covering, or will it be open? And if it's open, what will prevent people, animals, and trash from getting into that creek? 6, how will the people in the large condo on the north side of 223rd and west of 6th, so right down near the turning point, how will they get in and out of their parking areas if the creek is along part of 223rd? Second item, the Marina steps. Why is the concept called steps instead of walkway? I wish that guy from Skylab would be here. I think a better name may be Marina Access Walkway, because that's what it will have to be if you're going to be ADA approved. Relative to so how much distance will there be between where the creek ends, if it's down here 223rd, and the steps / walkway, and I'll be saying that combination several times, where it will begin? ADA-wise, what requirements will you be incorporated into this steps walkway? A slope of 8.33%, a 5 by 5 foot level platform every 30 feet. Thank you. A width of 5 feet, handrails on both sides, and probably some specified surface material. And what will be the underneath support for approximately 420 feet of zigzag and 70 feet, including 70 plus an additional 70 feet for those platforms, horizontal platforms? 5, if people come to the steps by car, where are they going to park? Because right now there is no place to park along there. 6, how much area, length by width, below the cliff will be needed for the steps and the walkway? And a little bit of humor, what is your estimate of what % of people walking down will have the energy to walk back up? I'll take any guesses. My concluding thoughts, the area at the top of 223rd and near the cliff seems to be very congested and a negative impact on cars wishing to drive down to the marina using that route. Regarding the steps or walkway, the name of Marina Access Walkway seems more appropriate, and for some, going down will be probably an exciting adventure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Moving on to Ms. Sharon Morehouse.
Okay, so my topic is kind of the marina, but mainly my focus is on safety. I really believe that enforcing and maintaining what we already have needs to be a priority. To begin this project or any other project, we're trying to stuff in to this small town that we're being told we can't keep a small town anymore, which is probably the reason most of us moved here in the first place, or we'd be living in Seattle instead. They're all trying to get out with good cause. And I don't think progress for the sake of progress is what we need to be after. I've noticed that Normandy Park is over here, and Kent is over here, and Federal Way is over here, and Puget Sound is over there. And we really don't have a lot of territory left to stuff a whole bunch more cars and people in. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Morehouse. Moving on to Mr. Sean Daly.
Thank you, Mayor. Sean Daly, 25-year Des Moines resident and current president of South Shores Condos, located on 6th Avenue and 223rd in Des Moines. We have about 48 units and almost 100 owners. Hotel. It's wonderful to hear from the city staff and council at the last study session that seems to be no longer on the table, and that bonds could be used as the primary source of revenue for projects at the marina, such as the marina steps or adaptive purpose building. No hotel. protect our open spaces. Thank you. Marina steps, these steps will run just north of South Shores condos. We've been told that the steps will come with several nice improvements and enhancements along the 223rd Street corridor, such as dropped utilities, new sidewalks, improved lighting, and landscaping. But with that comes more foot traffic and vehicle traffic, pedestrian noise, and reduced privacy, which are all safety issues for us. What we ask at the South Shores community is that the city staff and council keep South Shores condos in the loop during the design and engineering process. It might be best to also consider a couple options, one that includes the stormwater drain water improvements, and one that does not. The conceptual drawings that were shared with the public, they look wonderful, but also could be cost prohibitive and could extend that timetable. So maybe just build some attractive stairs that are widened, have a couple landings with lighting and landscaping that are ADA compliant. Adaptive purpose building versus boathouse, there is a difference. Has the council looked at a boathouse only option? I believe we've only really heard about the adaptive purpose building. How many boats will this boathouse hold? What are the dimensions that are being considered? Why not a boathouse in the center of the marina and a commercial building in Parcel A where the hotel was initially proposed? Parcel A, what is the market value of Parcel A? It's been sitting vacant for years. How about a commercial building here that supports small business, such as a restaurant, brewery, winery, or maybe a dive shop and an office space for the harbor master or other? Again, maybe an adaptive purpose building is too much. And passenger-only ferry, consider a Gig Harbor, Ruston, Des Moines route. I think that would be wonderful. No bonus time needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Moving on to our last speaker for the night, Mr. Bill Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. I'm here, first of all, to speak about something that surprisingly has been ignored throughout all these discussions about these improvements in the marina. And that has to do with the maintenance of Dock Avenue. I think that we have all overlooked the importance of Dock Avenue because it provides that emergency access that very much could be needed if something ever happens on Cliffs Drive or 223rd where it comes down from the city. I live on Dock Avenue, coincidentally, but I also think it's extremely important for particularly the adaptive purpose building and the condominium that's located immediately behind it. We heard Skylab talk about just putting a bulkhead directly up against the bank in front of that condominium, and I don't think that's safe. And the reason I don't is because if you have a fire in that adaptive purpose building, which there's a great possibility of happening, and it's loaded with boats, combustibles, and fuel, that could be a very bad fire. And you need access between that building above it and the adaptive purpose building. Now, I'm surprised Skylab didn't address that issue because I think that building stands a great potential to be very dangerous, and I would think that the residents of the condominium above it would be very concerned about that. It's also necessary because I think you need to have access for the fire trucks and for all other emergency vehicles to get up to the park, again, in case something happens on Cliff Drive. That's a very narrow street. You've all been down it. I looked at it again today. The distance across at the upper end between the bank, right about where the other street comes down and makes a sharp turn. Across there, I bet you that's just about the width of 30 feet, which is the right-of-way. And that would not be enough. If you had a vehicle jackknife in there, if you had a fire truck get sideways or crosswise, or you had a bad accident, you had a slide on that hillside, which could result from an earthquake or something else, I think you'd depend absolutely on Dock Avenue being the means of access for any kind of emergency vehicle to get to your wood buildings that are located in the park, the beach park. That's a very precarious possibility, I think, and I think you should, in all of your plans for this area, you need to consider the importance. I think that street needs to be kept open, and it needs to provide access from the north end all the way to the south end of the marina. The second thing I want to mention, just briefly, I have additional things in my remarks. The second thing is I think you should reconstitute the advisory board or advisory committee and have input from the Downtown Association and the Marina and all of the other neighborhoods in the city. I don't think you've had enough input from the wide areas of the city, and you need to have that before you proceed any further with this project. The third thing I want to say quickly is I think you need to develop the downtown and go down from there and not work from the marina up. I think the downtown is what needs to be improved in order to draw people up from the waterfront. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. All right, Michael, I'm going to turn the floor over to you for the city manager report.
Thank you, Mayor. Fortunately, we have a really positive report tonight. And we've been blessed with resources from the American Rescue Plan Act funds that came from the federal government, from the CARES program that came from the federal government. And we were able to expand our engagement with a number of nonprofits providing services, essential services to our city. And tonight, fortunately, we have a presentation by one of those nonprofits, and I'm going to ask Rochelle Sims, who's our, I don't know, I don't have time between where you sat down and get to the podium, your titles, but I know she works as a management analyst, has been our domestic violence advocate, and has been involved in us in coordinating our Human Services Advisory Committee. So with that, Rochelle.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council, City Manager Matthias. My name is Rochelle Sims, and before I introduce our next guest, I'll give a little bit of background. I do manage our human service contracts here with the city. So our advisory committee reviews all of the applications, and they make funding recommendations to the City Council. Those recommendations were approved by the City Council in November of 2022. So contracting with each respective agency quickly went underway by city staff, and now that all of that hard work is done, my goal is to invite agencies to come and present before council. This is also an opportunity to share with our community as a whole all the nonprofit agencies that we contract with, and then more importantly for our community and residents to understand how they access those services if they need them. So when I say important work, that definitely does not adequately describe the work of this first agency. Tonight we have the pleasure of welcoming Pediatric Interim Care Center. We as a city have funded this agency since 2017. And as you hear about the programs and the work that they do, you'll understand why we value this partnership with them so much. So with that, I will turn over to Elaine Purchase from Pediatric Interim Care Center. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank the City of Des Moines for being such a wonderful neighbor to us. We are actually located in the city of Kent, but we are a region-wide resource, and the South King County cities, their consortium has been supportive of us for a number of years, and Des Moines, as part of that, has funded us with a human services contract since 2017. We're very grateful for those who have participated in providing this service that really, in essence, we could serve the entire state of Washington, but in realistic terms, we serve the greater Puget Sound region. Pediatric Interim Care Center, the newborn nursery, provides transitional care for drug-exposed newborns. We are the only facility that does this. We were the first in the country to see this need and to provide this service, and we are still the only one in the state of Washington and one of only a few in the country that have been successful in providing this, and we have been doing it now for 30 years. PIC was founded in 1990 in Kent in response to the need to provide a level of care that would be between hospital care and home care for this specific population of vulnerable newborns who have been prenatally exposed to drugs. Originally, these were largely cocaine-exposed newborns who were very often premature at birth and needed a long period of care. And so what was missing in the healthcare system and in the social services system was basically a nursing home for babies. Something between a hospital and home, something where these babies didn't need to stay in the hospital for 30 or 60 days, but at the same time, their fragility was to the point that they would not be safe at home. So that's why PIC was founded. That's what we still do. Over the years, all the drugs have changed. We've seen trend after trend of drugs. We started with what were then called the crack babies back in the 90s. We had the grunge era of heroin babies. We had the wave of methamphetamine babies when they had the meth labs that were exploding out in the woods. And then we had the wave of prescription drug babies during the oxycodone and oxycontin era. And now we are seeing a lot of the babies who are exposed to, again, opiates, heroin, and now the big drug, of course, is fentanyl, and often, and usually, in fact, in combination with methamphetamine. So that's what we're seeing with the babies today, and that's who we take care of, these little ones. If I can figure out where my little advancer is here. Ah, the right one. Here's a picture of our facility in Kent. We were able to build this building in 2004, started it in 2004, moved in 2006, at a time when we had outgrown the original. It originally was founded in kind of the downtown doctor's offices that had been remodeled by Boeing employees to help us take care of the babies, but we had outgrown it and it wasn't up to the safety standards. So we were able to build this, again, with the help of a lot of the South King County cities, helped us build this building, as well as Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Paul Allen, and many, many, many generous donors, especially from the South King County area. The infants that we take care of are, they come from every walk of life, from every socioeconomic group, from every racial group, from every ethnic group. Drugs have affected really every family if you look hard enough. What happens to these babies is that at some time during their pregnancy, their mothers have taken drugs. It isn't that pregnant women take drugs, it's that drug-addicted women get pregnant. And that's what happens to these little ones, so that they are exposed to drugs in utero, and when they're born, basically their drug supply is cut off. And so they go through withdrawal from those. And what we see in adults is, you know, painful and distressing. What we see in babies can be life-threatening. They can have seizures, they can fail to thrive. If there's no intervention and they are returned to drug-involved households, there could be abuse or neglect. So it's very important that we provide services at the time when these babies are at their most vulnerable point. The babies come to us from hospitals throughout Washington State, but again, it's primarily here in our Puget Sound region. We have a transport nurse team that goes out and picks up the babies from the hospitals and brings them to us. They stay about 37 days with us, and during that time, they're cared for by our experienced nursing staff. Our nursing staff consists of RNs who are in charge of the medical care and are duty at all time, and then trained nurses aides that actually provide the infant care, the changing and diapering and burping and all that sort of stuff. And then the medical care is overseen by our pediatrician and medical director, who examines all the babies when they arrive and then makes rounds to check on their progress, and has been doing this, and has been on call 24/7 for 30 years. Even though he's now retired from his practice, he still does the babies. One of the things that we do with the babies is we provide a special kind of handling, because one of the things we see across this population is that the babies are very hypersensitive to stimuli, which means they may not be able to abide light, sound, loud noises, even touch. Sometimes even looking in their face is too much for them to bear. So our staff is trained in special handling techniques, things like the snug swaddling that keeps a baby who's having tremors from having to control their body, the way they're curled when they sleep, the way that they're rocked and handled is very important with these babies so that they are able to relax and eat and sleep. For babies, especially those who have been exposed to heroin and other opiate drugs, they sometimes have a very, very distressful and difficult withdrawal where they have severe tremors that they can have seizures. They can have very severe diarrhea, and if you can imagine, it's like having, when you're born, having the world's worst headache and stomach cramps. And so these poor little ones can't eat or sleep, and it's without some kind of medication to help them. So for these babies, we do what's called narcotic-assisted withdrawal, which is that they receive very small drops of neonatal morphine on a regular schedule, and then that's slowly decreased over time as they're able to tolerate it until we're able to totally withdraw them from their dependence on the opiates. Especially with the large population of methamphetamine babies that we're seeing now, a lot of times these babies are born without any fat on their body. They're like little birds. And they have no hunger reflex. They will sleep all night, a newborn who will sleep all night because they don't wake to feed, and when you do try to feed them, they hardly take any formula at all. And what can happen to these babies if they're not identified and taken care of is that they can slowly just fail to thrive, fall into malnutrition, and eventually lack brain development that can affect them for their whole lives. So we want to make sure that these little ones get the care that they need. And our staff is just absolutely expert at teaching these babies to eat. And that takes 30 to 60 days sometimes to bring them through this. But we're able to do it without feeding tubes, which is what are often used in hospitals when they address these kinds of problems. And the problem with that is when you use a feeding tube, the baby doesn't learn to swallow. And that can be a lifetime problem that they'll have to deal with. Whereas if you take the time to sit there for 45 minutes every time they have to feed and expertly feed them, you can bring them through this. While the babies are going through withdrawal, we invite and encourage and welcome their parents to visit. We actually have a social worker who works with them and provides transportation, lodging. If they live outside of the area, they can come stay in a hotel for 2 or 3 days a week so they can visit their baby. We always provide caregiver training for whoever's going to take the baby when they leave us, and infant supplies to go home with them. And then our social worker follows them at home for 6 months to make sure that they're getting the services that they need. About half the babies go home with either a parent who's usually parents who are in treatment, or sometimes there might be a father who wasn't involved in the drug use. A lot of times it'll be with a grandma or an aunt, somebody in the extended family. In fact, that's more likely to be the first placement. And then about half of them go into foster care. Of those that go into foster care, some may eventually go back to their families and some will be adopted. And what on earth happened to the font there? I'm not sure, but what it's telling you is that since our founding, we have cared for more than 3,300 babies. Every single one of them has gone home to grow up and become the children and young adults that they are now. Excuse me. Our first baby, who's the bottom right-hand one with our founder, Barbara there, is a mom with 3 children, and she lives in Des Moines. And we have college graduates, high school graduates, we have nurses. The upper right graduate there, after she graduated from high school, came and worked for us as a nurse's aide, taking care of the babies while she was, during the summers when she went to college. In a way, kind of giving back to what had been given to her when she was a baby. And again, we just thank you so much for supporting us, and we really love having this opportunity to share what we do with you.
Thank you so much. A couple quick questions.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, thank you for what you do. It touches me that there's that service out there. Question I had, because you were answering them as you were going along, but especially these children that have gone through, the the drug addiction from the parent, particularly the mother and so forth. They are more susceptible to addiction as they grow older. Do you guys also, provide additional education, or they tap to sources where?
Training.
Okay.
There are a couple of things, there are a million myths about these little ones that are not true. They, you know, they do just grow up to be children. Drug exposure, if they are able to get a healthy, safe and healthy start in life and a good environment, they generally do as well as all children do. They're not that different than the general population. We do see two kind of persistent problems. One is that sensitivity to stimuli that can go on. And sometimes that can be read as ADD because they can be overwhelmed by stimuli. So especially when they go to school, it's a very stimulating environment. And so that can sometimes be seen as ADD, and it isn't quite the same. But that's one of the things we try to work with our families on, is there are ways that you can teach a child to manage stimuli, and the ways that you can help them manage stimuli so that doesn't become an ongoing problem. And the other thing is the danger of addiction. We don't know whether it's because of the prenatal exposure or if it's the genetic predisposition that they're getting from their parents, who obviously have that issue themselves. And we do see a lot of generational trends in this anyway. So that's another thing that we warn them about, that as a parent, that's one thing you've got to be incredibly vigilant about, because that could be an issue.
I'll let the city manager go, and then
Just a really quick follow-up, and it's phenomenal what you do. Thank you. And I know that all of us are, the city and the council, myself, our staff are so happy that we can contribute. Well, my question is, are there any studies or any understanding that later life addiction is based on the drugs that they were addicted to as babies?
That's what we were just kind of talking about, that we're not sure if it has something to do, if it's the exposure or if it's the genetic makeup they're getting from their parent, who obviously had an addiction issue in their lives. It's really hard to tease those things out. What is the genetic predisposition? How much did the exposure have to do with it? We don't know. And I don't think anybody does.
I'll go with Deputy Mayor Buxton and then you, Councilmember Harris.
Thank you so much for your work. Really, really appreciate it. I appreciated the ability to tour. I think right before COVID, we got to go down. And I've done the walk, so I wanted to ask about the walk. You do a fundraiser once a year, and I wanted to ask when it was going to happen. If you could tell us a little bit about that and when it's going to happen this year.
We have two fundraisers a year. We haven't been able, our major fundraiser for years was our annual luncheon, and we haven't been able to have it since the beginning of COVID. But I just found out today that we are going to go ahead with our luncheon on May 31st. And Doug Baldwin is going to join us as our guest speaker. He's got to know us back in 2015 when he was with the Seahawks and was our speaker in the Super Bowl year, and everybody's always wanted to get him back. So he's going to be with us then. And then our other event is our Walk for the Babies, which is in Kent at Showware Center the first Saturday in October. So I'll provide information to Rochelle on those if anybody wants to get those. And I'll leave some cards too that just tell a little bit about us.
Councilmember Harris.
Thank you. So what, this is too big a question, but after 37 days, what does parenting look like? What extraordinary tasks or does the parent have to, is there?
Well, we're hopefully at that, but when we send the babies home, they are completely off medication. They are completely through their drug addiction. They are healthy, normal babies. So the ongoing problem I was mentioning they might have is that sensitivity to stimuli, and that's something that their caregivers have to be aware of and work with. Not to overwhelm them with too many toys, too many people, maybe not a busy daycare first right offhand, that might not be something they can tolerate yet. So to introduce those kinds of stimuli slowly is the main thing. Yeah. And so much we don't have any say in where the babies go. They come to us as a temporary shelter care or foster care placement. And then it is the state DCYF that decides where the babies go from there. So we don't really have any say in that, other than we have some input on being able to say what we saw while the baby was here, but that's really all. So so much has to do with how stable the environment is, where the
But I
child's
mean,
going.
just the care and maintenance, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
I mean, is.
Not really that much different than it would be for any other child,
Sure.
than any other baby at that point. That's our goal. Our goal is that when they go home, they're basically ready to just be a baby.
Thank you so much.
Councilmember Steinmetz.
Just kind of to follow up, if the babies that come to you addicted, are they, the parent, I assume, is likely to be under supervision from the dependency court or DSHS, isn't that correct?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. A good number of our moms have already gotten involved in treatment during their pregnancy. A lot of times that's a methadone program or a Subutex program, a maintenance program that also involves counseling and that sort of thing. So those babies may come to us as voluntary placements. They're where they are going to go home to mom. So we have some babies that go home to mom in treatment, but that would probably be the difference would be the babies who come to us whose mothers are already involved in treatment.
Okay.
That would just be a voluntary thing, and those babies are going to go back to mom unless something happens or there's a reason not to.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll leave these here.
Rochelle, thank you. Thank you, ma'am, very much. That concludes our report for tonight, Mayor.
Will the city clerk please read the consent agenda?
Item 1, approval of vouchers. Item 2, approval of minutes. Item 3, Black History Month proclamation. Item 4, draft ordinance 23-003 related to designation of city park. And that concludes the consent calendar, Mayor.
Councilmember Nutting.
I approve the consent agenda as moved, as read.
Do I have a second? Councilmember Pennington on the second. Does any council member wish to remove an item?
Yes.
Councilmember Oxiger.
Yes, I'd like to remove, what is it? It's item number 4.
Okay. Councilmember Harris, did you have an additional item, or was it item 4 you wish to remove?
No, Mayor, that's it.
Okay, so we'll be approving the consent agenda on items 1, 2, and 3. All those in favor, raise your right hand. As it should be, passes unanimously. All right, with item 4, Councilmember Oxiger, you
have to read this.
Oh, yes, thank you for the correction. I need to read this, and I'm gonna have to pull out my glasses because my print is fine, so apologize for that. All right. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be we live again. That's Mary Angelou, author. One's history is a fundamental aspect of one's culture experience. To deny one's history, or to have others deny one's history, creates a falsehood as to the nature of one's experience. Defining myself as opposed to being defined by others is one of the most difficult challenges I face. Carol Moseley Braun, first black female U.S. Senator. The celebration of Black History Month is a recognition across the country of the experience and events occurring in the lives of African Americans and those whose roots run deep through the African diaspora. For I am my mother's daughter, and the drums of the Africa still beat in my heart. Mary McLeod Bethune, educator. Acknowledgement of Black history points out that no one culture, no one race possesses claims to be the dominant history of our nation. It is a shared history seen through many different eyes. In these days that have presented the challenge of America accepting the truth that Black Lives Matter, it is all more important to honor Black history and the innumerable contributions made by African Americans, history seen through the eyes of people of color reveal an America that engenders hope for justice, but also retains strong currents of endemic racism. Whereas Black History Month is celebrated in recognition of achievement and contributions made by African Americans and all people of African descent in the United States. And whereas Black History Month affords special opportunity to become more knowledgeable about Black heritage and to honor the many Black leaders who have contributed to the progress of our nation, and whereas such knowledge can strengthen the insight of all our citizens regarding the issues of human rights, the strides that have been made in the crusades to eliminate barriers of equality, and the continuing struggle against racial discrimination, injustice, and poverty. And whereas the city of Des Moines embraces its diversity and acknowledgement and acknowledges the invaluable contribution of its African American residents and visitors as we celebrate Black History Month. And now, therefore, the Des Moines Council hereby proclaims and recognizes the month of February as Black History Month and urges our citizens to join together in making this period of rededication to the principles of justice and equality for all people. Sign this day, Mayor. All right, appreciate that. With item 4, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Councilmember Oxiger, since you pulled the item.
Yes, this comes with two motions. The first is to suspend Rule 26A in order to enact draft ordinance number 23-003 on first reading. This is usually held for emergency situations. What is the emergency with regard to needing to pass this tonight without putting it forward for further public comment?
I don't believe it's reserved for emergencies, Councilmember Oxinger. The council can waive Rule 26A in their discretion. If the council did not feel like they were prepared to adopt this tonight, our next council meeting is February 23rd. We talked at the committee meeting tonight about once this is passed, we begin working with our vendor to look at doing speed studies for Redondo and potential sites for traffic cameras, so we would just be delaying that process for 3 weeks.
Okay, so the delay for 3 weeks, is this something that, is it possible to ask the police chief what impact this would have on what he's trying to do?
It would delay it by 3 weeks. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it would delay the decision to get going for at least 3 more weeks. And I think the important part to consider, at least for the 5 years that I have worked here in the city, it has been a significant issue, a big deal for the Redondo community to really address the issues down in Redondo. So the next steps, once this ordinance passes, if it passes, then I contact the company, they do a study, and then if the study is good, then they do implementation, and they get permits, and they put the equipment in, and they test it, and they get it going. And our hope, my hope as the police chief, is we can get this up and running before the weather gets warm, more people are out on the street, and the whole reason we're doing this is for the safety of our community. So the longer we delay that, the longer that it pushes the project out into the summer, and we really want to get this going and keep our community safe in that area.
Can I get a motion first before we go, because that's what we're talking about.
I was basically going to say the same thing as the chief. So with that, I have no problem making the motion. We've heard from the Redondo residents. I move to suspend Rule 26A in order to enact draft ordinance number 23003 on first reading.
Second. I got a second from Councilmember Pennington. I saw you too. So basically what we're going to talk about and discuss is suspension of Rule 26A and that only. So with that, I'll start with, well, you had the floor before, so I'm going to give it to Councilmember Oxiger, then Councilmember Steinmetz, then Deputy Mayor Buxton, then Councilmember Harris. Okay? So go back.
Thank you, Chief. That, summation is, this is the type of reason why we should suspend the rule, is to try and get this thing enacted, because we do have a summer situation coming up. So, and this is a case where I usually, am not in favor of suspending Rule 26A, but I think this is a justified case. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Steinmetz.
I agree with Councilmember Oxinger. I'm generally not in favor of suspending Rule 26A in order to speed things along. I think it gives for a better deliberative process. But for those of us that are familiar with the history of this has been through a long deliberative process, really trying to come up with a plan that's going to be effective and work in response to the complaints that we've had from the people of Redondo. So I do think that this is one of those situations where we have had the deliberative process. We know what the public feels about this. There's been plenty of chance for input, and so I think suspending Rule 26A is appropriate under these circumstances, particularly given the timeline that the Chief just reiterated.
Deputy Mayor Buxton.
Ditto.
Okay, Councilmember Harris.
So how long will the study take?
Sir, we're just talking about 26A.
Well, that's relevant to basically the urgency of implementing this
Okay,
tonight.
fair enough. Just want to make sure clarification.
2 weeks from now, that's
I don't know. I will tell you, in this case, as I've mentioned earlier, in the Public Safety Emergency Management Committee, because this is such a priority, I feel, for the Redondo community. Not only did I communicate with the company that puts in the red light cameras and the speed zone cameras, I started communicating with them at the end of last year. And actually, 2 meetings ago, I spoke with the president of the company. And I said, look, I'm the police chief representing this community. We feel this is important. If these issues get approved, I want to get this thing done as quickly as I can. Now, I've learned in dealing with public works projects, the chief's idea as quickly as I can and engineers is a little bit different. But I went right to the top of the company and said, please make this a top priority. So the answer to that's a long answer to the question. I just don't know. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Any more discussion before we take a vote? Okay, all those in favor of motion 1, raise your right hand. Motion passes 7-0. Is there any discussion about motion? Go ahead.
I was just going to make the second motion.
Thank you.
To enact draft ordinance number 23-003, amending chapter 19.12 DMMC to include Redondo Boardwalk and adjacent city-controlled tidelands within Redondo Beach Park.
Second.
I have a second from Councilmember Steinmetz. Discussion? Councilmember Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Just as a point of clarification, what is the geography that would be applicable to having a speed camera? Is it the boardwalk going north-south, or is there opportunity east-west in any of the area?
Yeah, I think that it's important to understand this is the preliminary aspect of this process that council is approving us to move forward. And what this does is designate parks that were included in state legislation to expand kind of the options to utilize these cameras. And the questions associated with that would be answered in the process prior to implementation. Is that fair? Yeah.
Well,
So I can't answer the questions before we've done the research.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Oxinger.
I'd just like to thank everybody for moving this along. As I said, it's been 25 years, it's now 26, that since Redondo and Woodmont annexed into the city, and this was a priority from day one as far as trying to do something about the horrific traffic and problems that we have down in Redondo. So I enthusiastically am going to vote yes for this.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of motion 2? Motion passes 7-0. Congratulations, you have a new park. All right. Getting on to old business, we are going to go with the reallocation of American Rescue Act funds.
And let me introduce that a little bit. Jeff Friend is available, our finance director, if there's specific questions. But we have been tracking our use of the ARPA money, and this has been based, some of it was based on the emergency needs associated with COVID, and a number of those were addressed. Other ones, there were funds left over. So we're recommending to council about $565,000 of the reallocation of ARPA funds out of a total of about $9.2 million that the city has received and designated in prior meetings. So I don't know if you have specific questions. You can see on page 2 of the agenda item what the projects are where there were funds left over and or not utilized to date. And there's also recommendations for the reallocation of those funds. The numbers essentially match. And with that, if there are questions or if council wants to take action, that's where we are.
Right. Deputy Mayor Buxton.
I don't have a question. I'd like to make the motion.
You may.
I move to approve the recommended reallocation and expenditure of unspent American Rescue Plan Act funds.
Second.
Second from Councilmember Nutting. Discussion. Councilmember Oxiger.
These funds were intended to help us, cope with COVID and the things that have gone. I think one of the biggest disasters that has happened with COVID is what it has done to the education of our children. We're looking at kids have basically lost an entire year of education. They're behind, they need help. One of the things that we used to do in this city is we used to have before and after school programs at each of the elementary schools. Now it's consolidated at the field house. That makes it difficult transportation-wise for the parents, but also the need for tutoring to help these kids. I think that this money, the $565,548, would be much better used to helping our kids. There's nothing more important. We had the presentation earlier here about helping kids. We're talking about throughout the city. It's just been disastrous. And passenger ferry, kids with me win every single time. So I would oppose the motion.
City Manager?
Yeah, council member, I think a couple of things. So doing and I'm not quite sure you're talking about before and after, you're talking about tutoring, but the idea is that, first of all, it's been very difficult to acquire park staff to run these programs. Absolutely difficult. The other thing is that the inherent characteristic of the ARPA funds are used as one-time monies because there is no structural follow-up to keeping those in place. And the one place where we did do that, council did approve, was creating some police officer positions that we will be on the hook to establish what's the ongoing long-term structural support for those positions, even though they were funded originally out of the ARPA funds. So those are certainly fair discussions, I think, to have during the budget process relative to what would be the structural impacts of doing tutoring. I think that we work closely with the district. the school district, and I think that's really their sort of bailiwick in terms of knowing how to do those types of things better than we are. But that's not to say we wouldn't support that if council was so inclined, but I think that that's a much larger discussion personally.
I would also add, I was just looking at the next page, of the ARPA money, the 9 million received, we dedicated $1 million to Parks and Recreation already. So, with that, and I think there's a value in the ferries and stuff like that, so.
Well, the thing is that, okay, we did allocate the money to Parks and Rec, but the programs are not open. And these are, a lot of times, these are before and after school programs. This is where parents, the high cost of daycare is, you know, has been devastating to our families. This money should go to the kids. I'm sorry.
So are you making a motion? Is that what you did, to dedicate the $565,000 to?
I would make an amendment to transfer the monies towards providing support for kids that have been impacted negatively by COVID.
Okay.
And if I may, there's always been a problem with parks in terms of helping those who cannot help themselves, in terms of how do we document that? How do we establish a fair process? What's the research involved? What's the threshold? That's never been done. So to say we want to help people that need help is great. How do we go about doing that? It's never really been established, right? But the other thing I want to point out is that we have a number of daycares in the city, both associated with churches and associated with private sector, okay? And one of the things I think we want to avoid is competing with the private sector by undercutting their price structure. We want those businesses to be successful. We don't want to take on the responsibility of undercutting their prices.
All right, I need a second first, if on his motion. Yes, because we're gonna take this because it, unfortunately, the other one, the motion, they're directly, well, I guess we're moving to approve the recommendation, reallocation, and expenditure of unspent rescue funds. So we're all in agreement that those get allocated, right? Where the money goes on the second motion is probably the discussion. So,
Mayor, just to clarify.
do I have that correct or not?
The city manager administration has recommended reallocation, so we're still on the first motion. So
Okay.
we have a motion on the floor. Councilmember Oxinger is moving to amend that to change the recommended reallocations to something else. So we need a second on his motion, then we can vote on that.
Yes, and then go to the first one again? Okay, I have
a comment, Mayor.
Or do we have a second before we start this conversation?
I cannot provide a second for that particular,
Well, then the motion will die from lack of a second unless somebody's gonna second it. Seeing none, sorry, Councilmember Oxiger, we're moving on to the first motion. Okay, so Councilmember Harris, I'll let you go next.
So, I would support an amendment removing passenger ferry service, just putting it back, because there is no urgency to allocating this money tonight. And the reason I did not provide a second is that when we went through this process, there was a utility assistance program, and it, to say the least, underperformed. This is the kind of thing, I don't want to give a blank check on anything. I would fully support putting the money back and then come up with a specific proposal, and, you know, I'd be happy to, but basically, I just want to put this money back and think about it.
Okay, so does he have a second?
That's Councilmember Harris's motion?
Yes.
I will second it.
Okay. Any further discussion before we go to the original motion?
Yes. Just in response, this is not reinventing the wheel. We had before and after school programs at each one of the elementary schools before. It's not like, you know.
Point of order, Mayor.
Yeah, this doesn't pertain to the motion. That motion had died from lack of a second. So we're just talking about him taking the money back to removing the money from allocation and delaying the process. Did I have that correct, Mr. Harris?
You did.
Okay, and that's what you seconded.
Okay.
If you have point to discuss, none? Okay, Councilmember Harris.
Well, I just want to clarify, the original idea for utility assistance was a very specific thing. Councilmember Martinelli and I, we had a discussion about how could we help as many people as quickly as possible. And that night, due to the expeditious nature of it, it turned into a blank check that went only to Puget Sound, and it just took forever. And so I'm just always in favor of just, if you've got time, just take a while, put down a specific proposal, and let's do that. I'm with you all the way. Thank you.
City Manager Mathias.
Yeah, so that program was utilized through PSE, I believe. They had programs in place. People who identified needs were served. There was no terrible, horrible, long delays. Lights didn't go out in people's homes because PSE responded, because that's what they're an energy company and that's what they're set up to do. We were able to pay our residents directly through PSE. So that was I think that was one of the most efficient programs, and you can see that the demand for what was allocated by the council did not meet, or the allocation exceeded demand, but no one was turned away.
If I may, that wasn't the point. It was a question of public awareness and providing more options. I mean, regardless of what you say, we had a slightly different intention, and so all I'm suggesting is that it's worth taking a couple of weeks and having something more specific, just to make sure that what we pass actually gets implemented as intended. Thank you.
Any further discussion before I take a vote? Councilmember Pennington.
We get confused often because of the beard.
Yes.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, Councilmember Harris, which funds are you asking to remove and put back to look at? Is it the ferry service funds or is it the all of the one up above?
My understanding was that we saved so much money on we did not spend like less than half of the money already allocated last year. So it seems to me that we have a certain amount of money to run the second test when we don't need this $400,000. So let's put it back and think about something else. Run your ferry test and see how it goes, and then we can spend it somewhere else. Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
All right. Any Councilmember Steinmetz, and I see you, Deputy Mayor.
Point of information. I understood Councilmember Harris's motion to include the $565,548.
Yes, it was all the money.
Not just the ferry funds.
No, I said 400,000.
Of the 565?
Yeah. The Marina infrastructure, I mean, we're going to do the feasibility study, the Arts Commission, I'm all on board with that. I can see spending that stuff, but the 400 grand, put that back for another day. Is that?
And I'm still confused. What does put it back mean?
It means put it back into the art. Do not allocate it
asking
for.
The city manager to see if he understands what your motion is, because I'm confused. Trying to make sure.
I will be not so rude as to agree with you. But the thing about it is that this is money that needs to be allocated by the 31st of December 2024 and spent by the 31st of December 2026. So what we've anticipated, and I hope that we mentioned this when we first said we would bring this back, is that this may be the first of several discussions about the reallocation of funds based on the utilization of those funds. So when you say put it back, I'm sorry, I'm equally confused. I don't know exactly what that means. Apparently, it may mean that there's $400,000 of excess that remains unallocated. I'm not,
I do not wish to allocate $400,000 of ARPA money to the passenger ferry fund.
Councilmember Steinmetz.
Is there any intent to allocate that 400 somewhere else, or do you want it to sit unallocated? That's what I'm not clear about.
I want it to sit unallocated for the next opportunity.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Buxton, you raised your hand?
I have a comment. My comment has to do with, now that we're in the middle of his motion, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
It's just making it unallocated
Yeah.
again.
I have a comment on the next.
All right. Any further discussion? Councilmember Oxiger.
I would just like to point out that if we do allocate the 400,000, then it's gone. There can be no further discussion. So I fully support holding this until, we decide in the future where to put it.
All right. Let's go ahead and take a vote. That 400,000, Councilmember Harris's motion, that $400,000 go back to unallocated for a decision to be decided later. All those in favor, raise your right hand. I see Councilmember Harris. I can see Councilmember Oxiger. I see Councilmember Steinmetz. All those opposed? I see Councilmember Pennington, Deputy Mayor Buxton, Councilmember Nutting, and myself. Motion fails 3-4. All right, we're back to the first motion. So these are the funds. The passenger ferry, $400,000, marine infrastructure, $115,000, Arts Commission, $50,000. Yes, Deputy Mayor Buxton.
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of ARP, if you go look it up on any number of websites, basically is for the support of housing, economic development, and/or to provide other public benefit for residents. So this falls under that. In regard to this ferry, supporting the ferry service and an extended pilot, which is what we're going to be considering here in the future, since I've been elected, there hasn't been anything so universally exciting, accepted, looked forward to, if you could say that whole, in just across the board, the amount of community support for this. So I would look forward to supporting it. I wanted to make a couple statements and read some data about the expenditure of ARPA funds on ferry systems. So there's precedence for using it. Distributions of around $900 million in federal COVID relief funds have been allocated to transit agencies around the Puget Sound. Washington State Ferries have allocated about $90 million for operating capital projects through ARPA, state ferries. Between Port Angeles, Clallam County, and the state, they've allocated over $8 million in ARPA funds for ferry service. The U.S. government is interested in funding successful passenger ferry programs and has invested $36 million in 2022 alone, with an additional $49 million for low to no carbon fuel vessels. So this country, this state, this region, PSRC, everybody's interested in ferry service, passenger ferry service. So an allocation of ARPA funding into ferry service, especially passenger ferry service and potential electric service, is more than appropriate and will be extremely beneficial to our community. So I approve this allocation.
Councilmember Oxiger.
And our kids are hurting.
Councilmember Steinmetz.
This is basically a question of, we've got some free money, where are we going to spend it? And, I am persuaded that spending one-time money on trying to restart before and after school programs is probably not a good idea. we need to make sure we have a funding stream that brings that forward. And it's not that I don't like that idea. I think we do need to get the before and after school care back into the schools if we can. But, you know, this is not just because we have a chunk of change sitting around that's not going to be there next year is not the way to go about putting that program together. So I really don't think that is an appropriate way to do that. As far as the passenger ferry service is concerned, that would probably not be my first choice. As where to put it, I don't know. I mean, frankly, I think it's a bigger conversation about how we're going to fund the ferry in the future, which is not to say I'm not supportive of funding the ferry. I am very much so, but I think it's a bigger conversation. However, you know, I think I will be voting for this because I think we do need to allocate the money and get the structure in place of how we're going to spend that. And as a consequence, I'm going to support the motion as written.
Deputy Mayor Buxton, and I recognize you, Councilmember Harris and Councilmember Pennington, and Councilmember Nutting. Deputy Mayor Buxton, you were first.
No, I'm sorry, I waved my hand.
Okay.
There are before and after school programs through Highline Public Schools, and they partner with other agencies. And so it's not like the kids have nothing. So that's all I'm going to say.
I had an order. I had Councilmember Harris, you were next, Pennington, and then you, Councilmember Nutting.
Thank you, Mayor. In the immortal words of former Mayor Dave Kaplan, one-time money for one-time expenses. A ferry has two purposes, either tourism or commuter. There is no financial case to be made for commuter service, and when you use one-time money for an ongoing structural service like commuter ferry service, you're basically taking money away from an appropriate one-time purpose, such as a capital project for a park and all these other monies that we, you know, there's a reason that we have so many services, and we go, man, why do we never have the money for it? And it's like, well, duh, and that's it.
Councilmember Pennington.
So as I understand, the 400,000 is to continue with the feasibility of the ferry service, and that to see if the ferry service will be self-sustaining in the future. Is that correct, City Manager?
Okay, so I think that we did phase one. It was very, very successful, both the revenue and the ridership. We're coming back to council saying we'd like to proceed with phase two, which would have expanded service and commuter service, and look in the future toward electrification of a ferry and all of that. But that would be something that would have, at that point, it would have to become a regional effort, because the city, and I think to the great credit of the council, picked up the cost last year and showed the success of it. And we'd like to continue to build on that. But in the future, there's going to have to be resources from other entities. The gentleman, one of the public speakers, said we should have Gig Harbor and Point Ruston. And we've had those discussions. Yeah, those are great ideas. They're also very expensive ideas. And so until everybody's playing equally and participating, whatever equally means, but participating for their share between the state and PSRC and the federal government and regional governments and city governments, until all those are coordinated, that's what we're trying to get to. But we're not anticipating ever that the city would shoulder this in the long term.
Okay, so we have an opportunity to, with some money that was provided by the federal government, that we wouldn't normally have had this opportunity to further explore the ferry service relative to a regional approach. And so we are one of the cities that that happens to have a marina where this can be based out of. And so I think it's one-time monies to find out some answers that we would normally not have had money to find those answers to. I think that's a good use of those dollars. To my colleague's comment about one-time monies for ongoing expenses, yeah, you're darn right. You don't spend one-time money for ongoing expenses. That's why the city was almost bankrupt, because of that practice. So I would love to see the city work with the school district on an enhanced after-school program, but one-time monies we throw at it, and then who's going to pick up the rest of the dime? So that's the kind of budgeting that got us into trouble a few years back. And that was a shell game that the city management at that time played, and it came to a head. So, I would support down the road if we have permanent monies to do after-school programs and to help work with the school district and support those programs. I don't think that this use of let's start a new program and get it here, and then maybe it falls off. I don't know that that's fair to the kids, Anyway, that's it.
Councilmember Nutting, then I see you, Councilmember Oxiger.
I was hoping to go after Deputy Mayor Buxton to dovetail with hers. Highline has programs that they run before and after school, and they're not being utilized to allocate city funds to the kids, which I'm all about. I always have been. I have school-aged kids, and I've always been about the kids, but to allocate city funds to programs that are not being utilized right now by Highline Public Schools, it just doesn't seem the right thing to do. And again, one-time funds for an ongoing thing. Let's get the kids signed up for the Highline programs, and come back to me with a budget amendment, and I'll be glad to allocate funds to that. But they're programs that are not being used right now.
Councilmember Oxiger.
They're not being utilized now because we have centralized the before and after school programs to the field house. The programs we had in place before were at the individual elementary schools, much more accessible to the families and the kids. So, and the fact that what we're playing is we're trying to play catch up to a problem that occurred because of COVID. Hopefully we would get to the point where we've made some progress as far as catching up. And so what better use of one-time monies than to, help those kids overcome a known problem.
All right, well, I'm gonna bring us back into the particular items on the extended, this particular item. The one thing about the ferry seems to be the question, and what I'd like to say is this is an opportunity to extend services. It was a great benefit to our residents, and we want to explore that more and give them more opportunity. It brought business to our community. It was an economic driver, and the PR we got, the attention we got was invaluable. People knew we were on the map, so it was valuable. With that, let's go ahead and take a vote on on this motion. All those in favor of the motion to approve the recommended reallocation of expenditures of unspent American Rescue Plan Act funds, please raise your right hand and say aye. I see Councilmember Pennington, I see Councilmember Steinmetz, I see Deputy Mayor Buxton, I see Councilmember Nutting, and myself. All those opposed? I see Councilmember Harris, Councilmember Oxiger. Motion passes 5-2. So the next motion, does somebody want to read it? So we can get going on it? Oh, I have it. I will, okay, Councilmember Steinmetz.
I move to direct the administration to prepare a budget amendment to incorporate the approved reallocation and expenditure of ARPA funds and include such amendment in the next available budget amendment ordinance.
Okay, since we talked this pretty much, do you have a second? Councilmember Nutting has a second. Since we talked this subject to almost exhaustion, I'll take one round before we take a vote. If anybody has any comments or questions. Seeing none. Okay, all those in favor of the second motion, raise your right hand. I see Councilmember Pennington, Councilmember Steinmetz, Deputy Mayor Buxton, Councilmember Nutting, and myself. All those opposed? Councilmember Harris, Councilmember Oxiger, motion passes 5-2. All right, we're moving on to the Marina Development Direction from City Council. Michael, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. What we're asking of council, as we, identified last week at the study session, is for council to direct us to move forward with conducting feasibility studies for the public works projects we identified for the landside marina redevelopment. And this is, I've received a lot of commentary about people that want, well, before you can vote on this, let's see your cost estimates, or let's see the design, or let's see the planning. This is to allow us to proceed with all of those, because we don't take action that costs resources without council approval and direction. So we're asking for you to direct us to perform the feasibility studies, and we will then come back to you in a number of forms, not the least of which is anything that's going to be recommended will show up in the capital improvement plan that the city council must approve as part of the budget process. And we will also come back for what would be the cost structure. You would have decisions about the kind of elements you want included in the different options. For example, marina steps. There's a number of ways to do that. We will want council to determine how they want to proceed with the information we can help provide you with from the consultants. So this is simply to start the process of evaluating the public works projects on the marina floor, and those include the marina steps, adaptive purpose building, possibly a tenant and public restroom, and a pavilion that would include kind of an overhang for the farmer's market and other uses. So we would want to bring those back.
Councilmember Nutting.
I didn't see a formal motion, but I move to approve the feasibility study of the public works portion of the marina redevelopment, including the steps, and everything aforementioned by City Manager Matthias.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Deputy Mayor Buxton. Questions and discussion. Councilmember Harris.
Doesn't a study usually come with at least, an outline of a budget?
It would depend on the type of, yes.
I'm just, in other words, when would the feasibility be feasible, and what would be the work product? I'm just asking because we've gotten 3 grants from the Port of Seattle, and see, this is why I come across as so stroppy, but we've had 3 feasibility studies. There's a geotech report, discussion of like an MSC wall, and so I just want to know what, I'm a dumb engineer. What are we studying? What's the budget, and when do we come back into the next decision point? I don't want to argue with anybody, but that's, what I'd like to know.
I would like to see this to at least include some process for surveying the public as to what it wants.
I think what we will do is, based on what we presented to City Council, we will provide you with much more specific kind of look at what would be involved, and that's ultimately going to be direction from council as to how to proceed. And I would assume that City Council, as it has always done in this process, will solicit input from the public relative to decisions related to moving forward.
Councilmember Oxiger.
I would move to amend the motion to formally put it in the motion to have the public process, and that the public process begins at the start of this.
Councilmember, I think that we have had multiple meetings. We would intend to have multiple more. I don't know that you need to put this into the feasibility motion to move forward with feasibility. We'll take that information, share it with council, get public input, all of that. That's just been a part of the nature of doing this. If you want to make it explicit, you're certainly welcome to do that, but I'm not sure it's necessary based on what we're asking for, which is simply to move forward with feasibility analysis.
All right, do we have a second for his amendment to the motion? Seeing none, lack of interest, we'll move on to the motion at hand. Councilmember Harris, this will be your second time.
Again, you know, the reason, it's not for lack of desire to have public input. It's just that, again, there are like no measurables in, you know, what exactly entails a community survey. And I don't think that any of this jazz can be decided ad hoc. There really needs to be a discussion of what would that community survey look like. We're just so far away from, it's just, yeah, I don't want to do something worse by doing something hasty. It doesn't mean I don't want to do something. It's just that you should have an item on the agenda that where we discuss what exactly would a community survey entail, and I just don't think we're, and what that, because we don't have a citizens advisory committee, we don't have a public planning commission, we don't even have like the framework to have a discussion where you would come to a work product that would be useful for the entire city. And I'm happy, I would love to have that kind of meeting. We did not have that. We had 4 whopping, basically yes/no questions at the study session. I'm sorry, I really need to have that surgery. Yeah, so, yeah, I would love to have another discussion, but I will not vote for this tonight until we decide what it is we're driving towards. Thank you.
Councilmember Steinmetz.
I have a point of clarification. The public works projects for the landside marina development, as I understand it, those were well defined in the study session. They were defined as well in the September 2022 the presentation, and it goes all the way back to the Argosy boat when everybody was picking what those projects were. Is this something different? Or
Councilmember, those are fair. There were a couple of things in there. The first one is the most recent large-scale meeting was at the Yacht Club, which came after the Argosy. And we have boards with the selections of our citizens based on what their preferences are. We have a number of boards with the dots still in them. And everything was moving forward. That was held at the Yacht Club in September of 2019. In October of 2019, council authorized us to proceed with an RFQ, and that ran head-on into COVID. So there was a 2.5-year delay. That, you know, and then we pick up the ball now, and, you know, for a couple of reasons that we explained, the developer that we had just, you know, chosen to work with didn't work out. So we're somewhat back to the drawing board, but this time we're recommending that we do our portion of this. And then the future is what the future holds. But we're not going to design that now relative to any private participation that we're aware of. It's going to be public participation. You're absolutely right. We've done design analysis, we've done feasibility analysis, we've looked at the financing of it, and now we want to put all those pieces together and come to council and say, what's your wish?
Councilman Oxiger, yours.
Does that answer your?
I think, yes, it does. So it really hasn't changed.
Right.
Over time. So if anybody's been paying close attention, which I know a lot of people have, what is, you know, what we're asking for, directing you to determine the feasibility of, has been defined since 2019.
Yeah.
You know, and yet I understand there are an awful lot of people that want to slow this down, that think now they don't, they keep throwing public input. there's been a fair amount of public input on this. And, you know, I just don't get why we're not anxious to get something done. And that's what we need to do. So I'm gonna support this motion. I think this is the right thing to do. And I think this is exactly what we want you to then bring us back the numbers and tell us what this is gonna cost and how long it's gonna take. Because that's what I understand as a feasibility study.
We're anxious to do that.
Councilmember Oxker, your second time.
And COVID has intervened. It's totally upended the way we do things. You know, we're talking about what was the opinions 4 years ago. Okay, look at downtown Seattle. Look what's happening to our industries. I mean, people talk about getting, you know, a grocery store downtown, and the thing is that the grocery industry, because of consolidations and everything else, is moving on in a different direction, and, you know, things have changed dramatically because of COVID. And I think we need to go back and assess from the public what they want to do.
Councilmember Harris, you've already had your 2 times.
May I have 15 seconds, please?
I'll give you 15 seconds and that's it.
So all people need to do when they walk out of here is look at Wagner Phase 2, March 2021, September 27, Skylab, and then what we looked at last week. And you tell me if the buildings, even the buildings are the same and the locations of the buildings are the same.
All
Just
right, that's
3
an answer.
pictures. Thank you.
You've had your 15 seconds, thank you. It's Councilmember Pennington.
Yeah, I think, you know, with Councilmember Steinmetz, you know, there's been a lot of public input. We've certainly got a lot of public input recently. Couple of takeaways from that was no hotel, which I don't believe that's even feasible to do. And yeah, we want some reasonable development done at the marina, something that makes sense. And I think that what we're asking staff here is to take the input that they've got before, the input we've gotten recently, and give us, you know, what makes sense, what's feasible to do there. And I think, you know, if we don't ask them to do this, you're gonna have the same conversation next year and the year after and the year after until, you know, you get tired of it, I guess. But I think we're asking them to do exactly what we've received in feedback from the public in several iterations over the period of time. So I think that we'll get answers, and I think we'll have another opportunity to then take a look at that and say, that makes sense, that doesn't make sense. We'll get input again, I hope, from our residents. And, you know, it's where are you gonna put the building blocks around here? You know, the one constant seems to be the stairway, the pathway, or whatever you wanna call it. That seems to be the constant. But where do the other building blocks go around there, and what are they, and what do they do? And that's what we're asking staff to give recommendations so that we can make a decision, and that decision comes with additional input from all of you. That's the way I see this in this motion. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Buxton.
Thank you, Mayor. I wasn't necessarily going to use this quote because it's like there's so much going on tonight, but because there's so much passion at the table here, my colleague said a few weeks ago on January 12th, Councilmember Harris said, if the public could go back to the UW studies of 2008, 2011, et cetera, they would go, wow, because they include the exact solutions that everybody's talking about. And they would make people happy. Now, that was my colleague said that just 2 or 3 weeks ago. So now we're here kind of, and then we saw, so that's what we did. And then later, the end of January, we saw the recommendations that of today were not, were really very similar, incredibly similar to the recommendations made by the past planning commissions and the UW teams. This means that the plans now have stood the test of time and age. The UW students of 2008 are in their 30s now, which is really the public that we're building for, right? So I guess I am so in favor of moving forward and finding out more information. It's just a little frustrating that the same people that said, oh, this is what you should do, we did, and now there's frustration about that. I just want some more data sets, and that's what we're asking for. Thank you.
All right. I'll just add a couple things. One, to Councilmember Oxinger's point about the grocery store. Being in the business, it's about density. That's how you get a grocery store downtown. We have many factors, as I mentioned the week before, where we have economic drivers. The Marina is a big part of those, along with several other things, to get that density downtown. And that's important. For 1984, so we're talking 39 years we've been talking about this. It's time to move forward and go forward. The public will be part of the process, but everybody's not going to be exactly thrilled with everything, but they're probably going to be 90% satisfied. It's just going to be part of the process here. This is basically, let's go and let's find out what it cost, and let's see if we can get it done. That's all we're doing tonight. The rest comes along. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor of the motion, or did we even get a motion? It's been a long night. We did? Great. Thank you. All those, sorry, man, it's been a long night. All those in favor of the motion to conduct the feasibility study, raise your right hand. I see Deputy Mayor, I see Councilmember Pennington, Councilmember Steinmetz, Deputy Mayor Buxton, Councilmember Nutting, and myself. All those opposed, Councilmember Harris and Councilmember Oxker. The motion passes 5-2. All right. Introduction of items for future consideration. This is the time for the sole purpose of proposing new items that have not previously been before the council for discussion on future agenda. This is not the time for questions of old business. Council members can submit questions or seek updates on previously discussed business to the city manager at any time. Do any council members have new business they would like to propose? Councilmember Steinmetz.
Yes, and I'd like to invite everybody to stay for a second, because I'm going to propose something affecting the Marina development. But my proposal is that we figure out a way, at a minimum quarterly, to hold Marina update sessions so that the public has a chance to hear what it is that's happening and also give some input on that. These are not council meetings. We're not adding additional council meetings. No business will be conducted, but they're informational out to the public. And I think that would be something that everybody wants, more information.
Or just when there's new information.
Yeah, like,
Would it,
No.
excuse,
That's why I say minimum quarterly.
I have a question.
He has a couple comments about clarification and when it's relevant, when it might be.
So what we could do is just, probably under city manager report, just every quarterly, put that item. And then if there's an update, give the update, and if there's no change in status, say there's no change in status, or this is in process.
I don't think that gets to what I'm trying to get to, which is a more public exchange where it doesn't necessarily have to be the city manager at this putting that information out there, but somebody who is knowledgeable who can say, this is what's happening, and answer questions accordingly, if they're even answerable at that point. But at least there's some dialogue, and people are getting more information about what's going on.
Right, but Councilman Martillo, I would just mention that there's a couple of dynamics here, and it wouldn't be fair not to mention it. But apparently, there's at least one council member that's insistent upon putting out misinformation. So a lot of the time is spent putting out fires for things that are not true. Mm-hmm. Okay. The other thing is not to mistake that we have multiple interactions with, quote, the public all the time, and get inputs and go out in the community and receive understanding. And it tends to be those that are feel they are most affected tend to show up the most because they have a direct interest in the outcome. There are other people who live further away from the marina, don't even have views of the water. They're less, they're supportive, they ride the ferry, but they're not as engaged. we'll be happy to provide the public with any and all information that we acquire in a timely manner, and I just don't want to get caught in a situation where the expectation is, okay, what's next, and we don't have what's next. So when it would be appropriate, be happy to do that, what you're describing, any way you want. You want to put it on an agenda, and then we just say, okay, well, this month, we write an agenda item or tell you whatever is going on.
I have a question, to clarify what he wants. So at least when we're answering them, we know what he wants.
So really quick, the thing is that I think that this is one of those opportunities where we might be able to do the city's manager's portion prior to some public comment or something like that, where we can work it in. Having and organizing separate, meetings for the public and everything, states of the city, they're quite an ordeal to get put together in time. And 3 months and stuff like that, the increments are pretty tight in those kind of regards. I think we can kill two birds with one stone, if that's acceptable to you. If we did something where that information was put out and then I just moved the public comment, particularly to that subject, afterwards to just hear feedback from the public. And of course, they've got the email and stuff like that.
I'm just trying to get it out of the
out
of the city council meeting.
Yeah.
Where things run high
And
have a public forum that everybody feels is.
And I understand that, it's just, I will say that the resources are stretched a little thin, and that's all I'm calling out, and that's where I was looking at the compromise. So I have, before I call on you, Councilmember Harris, I think Councilmember Oxiger's next, but did you have your hand up as well? So, and I thought you had yours first. So I'm gonna go Deputy Mayor Buxton, Councilmember Oxiger, Councilmember Harris.
So I just want to clarify, Councilmember Steinmetz, that you're asking for like a public forum, not on this property or not in these chambers, but something where, so a forum type format where there's a community member raises their hand, you call them, they ask a question, you do your best to answer, and you, like that. Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah, the location doesn't matter whether it's in these chambers or somewhere else. It's the opportunity of the public to be presented with some information and for them to ask questions and give some feedback.
So a forum. So he's not just an informational session, but a forum.
So and I'm gonna give both council members an opportunity to speak. One of the purposes of this meeting is that we can take it to the city manager if three or more of us discuss, and he can come back with some options for us, and I think that's what we're after. But with that, I'm gonna, unless you still have the floor.
I wanted to just clarify what he's asking.
So then I'm gonna give Councilmember Oxiger, Councilmember Harris, and then but it does seem like we have three people of consensus, so we can take it there. But I'll give you a few minutes each, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Mayor. So my understanding of this is that this is the introduction of items for future consideration. This is saying, it sounds like we're sitting here trying to work out the details right now, okay? But to me, what you were saying is we need to have a discussion about how to approach this particular problem, which would mean that we would have to sit down and hash out exactly how we want that method for dissemination of information. Is that correct?
Yes.
Then I support that, and I'll second it if nobody else has.
Well, in this particular case, there's no motions, it's just taking a referral. The idea we'd be giving it to the city manager for suggestions of how to achieve this objective. We're just telling them a little bit about what we want. What you're talking about is some kind of study session or something at a later date. Councilmember Harris, you have the floor.
What was he asking for? I don't think any of what has been suggested so far is excluded.
Yeah.
It's a question of how do we get the process out? We need to do something to inform the public.
Thank you.
You've got 3 to move it forward.
All right. 3 to move forward, but I'm going to give, because of unfairness, I'm going to give Councilmember Harris just a few minutes and then we'll move on.
So you're proposing having someone a representative from the city, basically stand before a community meeting, quarterly, to answer questions based on, how things are progressing?
Not exclusively answering questions, making a presentation so that there is an update to what is going on and 10 fielding questions if there are any.
Right, but, okay, but this is
This is not a firing squad.
I don't, I'm just, it's a representative of the city and taking questions from the public and providing updates. That's the idea?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I would not support that. Thank you.
All right. Councilor Pennington, because.
I support this. I think it's a good idea, and I support it for one reason. If we don't get out there and tell our story and give the updates, then somebody else will, and they may not be the accurate story.
All right, so basically, we're gonna give it to the city manager. He'll report back to us at a later date. All right, any other? Seeing none, okay, I'm sorry. Yes, Deputy Mayor Buxton, go ahead.
So I understand that in the city of Federal Way, 3 of their ball fields are being destroyed for public facilities in Federal Way. And when I found that out, I thought, wow, I think that we have a possible opportunity here in our city to enhance the field, the main field that we have at Stephen J. Underwood. So and that would be to create a system in the field to put a removable fence using little plugs so that we could have Little League there, conduct Little League events there. And so I would like to refer that possibility or discussion for gathering information or the process to municipal facilities. Okay.
All right, move to municipal facilities on that. Any other new items?
The chair's got to accept that.
Yeah, the chair.
The chair, we'll let the chair, I defer to the chair.
So
Again, it's a long night, man. Go ahead.
The chair accepts that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chair.
Comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I just want to remind council that in early March, hopefully a study session, it's our intention to have a discussion with council about what is possible for us to do under the new environment, cost of money, COVID, difficulty hiring employees, shortages in the labor market, all of that, that there may be things that we're not able to do as a city that we have done in the past. And I was just reminded by someone on our staff of Louisa Bang's rule, one more thing. So if we start taking on other projects, in advance, and it's council's choice as to what you want to do, we can't do everything. So if we start adding on to that, then some things will have to go away. So there are going to have to be trade-offs. And I think it's on us to try to make clear what those trade-offs would look like based on our staffing and all of that. Just a reminder. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, council, we have 18 minutes before you have to move for an extension. So we're going to board and committee reports. The only thing I ask is brevity as best you can. With that, I'm going to turn first over to Councilmember Pennington.
First off, for those that are still here, thank you. Tonight was not a great night for our community, but we'll move on and we'll move forward and we'll move through the things that happen. It's the way it is. We have to. This evening I sat on the public safety meeting, and I'll let the chair give that report, and that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Councilmember Steinmetz.
I have almost the same report. So, and I don't mean by that, because the first part of your report is very serious, and it really is a terrible thing that we have to deal with, but sometimes we have to deal with it, and that's unfortunate. So, and the other thing is I sat on public safety, but I'll defer to the chair to report on that.
Councilmember Oxiger.
I think tonight was an example of the fact that we do not have enough communication going on. Last April, the council indicated by consensus, unanimous consensus, that we wanted to move forward. We then had a vote of 5-2, and it was an argument it was actually the proposal was put forward by the city manager to hire a consultant and come up with a plan. The only reason there were 2 votes against it was because the question was, were we going to solicit proposals from vendors who might have, new programs or something that would be advantageous that we didn't know first, or that the consultant might not be immediately aware of. But anyway, we indicated we wanted to go forward with communication. Tonight was all about either an actual or perceived lack of communication, okay? We're almost a year out of direction from the city to do something, and I would like to see us move forward with that. We cannot be allergic to public comment. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. Okay, Councilmember Nutting, my apologies.
No remarks.
Councilmember Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm sorry people have left. All this other stuff. Do they still teach Kafka in high school? Let's see. Oh, yeah, a planning commission would be a council decision, not up to the city manager. It was taken away by vote in 2013, and the closing comment by Bob Scheckler was, well, we can always bring it back at any time, and whenever a politician tells you that, you should walk away. The steps was actually the Holmes Group. It's called that because, the Marina steps at Seattle. My niece is in a wheelchair, and she took a look at it and laughed. The concerns about the engineering and everything, my biggest thing is basically we had no business publishing a Skylab picture, okay? Because, in other words, you should do the studies and find out what's possible and then put up the picture. And let's see here. And I guess, regarding, Black History Month, I never get tired of mentioning Tavis Smiley's great book, Death of a King. And one last thing, somebody like me, the Groucho joke, was necessary. The problem with the public is that, nobody can tell, very few people can tell truth to power here because, if you care about dogs or public safety or Redondo or whatever your issue is, you have or the farmer's market, whatever it is, your incentives are all to make nice with the council, okay? It took somebody completely detached to be able to deal with the systemic problem that's been going on here for 3 decades. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Buxton.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we had the Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee meeting before this one. And we went over the work plan for 2023. And of note, it includes the items that we'll be addressing in different meetings, including updates on body cams, flock cameras, speed cameras, our summer activities, crime intervention programs, and our crisis response team, our GPS team. If you ever see that in regard to the public safety in Des Moines, it stands for Getting People Services. So excited about that program, and I'm excited to hear about all these as the year progresses. We received a Redondo speed camera update, and then of course, you heard a lot about that tonight. We voted on creating a park. And we also talked about the accomplishments of 2022 that our department accomplished. And a couple of interesting things coming up will be community chipping events. I think they're going to do 4 of them for animals, for your pets. A chipping event where people can gather and get free or discounted chipping of their pets, and they're going to be community volunteers that will be given some wands that if a stray animal, if CARES can't get to the animal right away, community volunteers can help with a wand of your chipped animal. And just about one more comment about the Getting People services. I am so happy that we moved forward with that and that we're still working to increase that team, our Getting People services team. We received an update in our Human Services Advisory Committee as well about how we work that plan and how we approach anybody on the streets and help them get to the next step in their life and services and connect them with anybody and shelter. I'm very proud of our city moving forward in that way. That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Van, I just want to apologize. We're not going to make room tonight for your voice, but I'll make sure you're first next time. It's just the end of the evening and it was out of the context, but I just sincerely apologize at this point. I just want to say this, and been involved in many things throughout the community for the last several weeks, but points of view aren't the problem here. It's conduct. And either you condone it or you condemn it. It's just that simple. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Passes 7-0. We are adjourned, and the next meeting is February 23rd. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.